Welcome back to EDH on a Budget. I'm your host Iceman, and today we're going to be going over budget, $2 budget reserve list cards. This is going to be part 2 of the series that we're doing. First up, we have Corrosion. This is an enchantment for 1 black and a red. It has cumulative upkeep 1. So if you don't know what that means, it means that the upkeep of yours after you play this card, you have to pay 1 or destroy this. And then the turn after that, pay 2, and 3, and 4, so on and so forth, until you want it to be destroyed. You just don't pay it. And it says, during your upkeep, put a rust counter on each artifact target opponent controls. If the number of rust counters on an artifact equals or exceeds that artifact's casting cost, bury the artifact, which just means destroy. If Corrosion leaves play, remove all rust counters from the game. So this is definitely an interesting reserve list card. There's not too many cards that do this. It's like a card that's going to continually hate on the artifact players. So it is going to affect one opponent at a time. You could have multiple opponents get rest counters over multiple turns, but more than likely you're just going to pick on the player that has like the most mana rocks or the most artifacts in general, because artifacts just really go nuts and snowball. They don't want just one nice artifact on the battlefield, they want a whole bunch. So this is a way to really keep them from getting too big too fast. And a nice thing about this is it doesn't target the artifact, it just puts a rust counter on each artifact. So if the artifact has hexproof, this will still go on them, and the only thing is if it's indestructible, you can't bury an indestructible artifact, so that won't do anything. But this is going to automatic, it's going to be rough for anybody who plays an artifact land, just because our artifact lands have a mana cost of 0, and this says if the number of rust counters on an artifact equals or exceeds that artifact's casting cost, bury that artifact. This has huge synergy with other cards like Liquid Metal Coating, Liquid Metal Torque, because you can turn cards into artifacts. And I don't know if I said it, but this card is $1.19. If you don't know, the reserve list cards can never be reprinted per an agreement that Wizards made. And next up we have another enchantment. This is actually an aura. Brand of Ill Omen for 3 and a red. This costs about $1.42 on TCG Player. It says cumulative upkeep, pay a red. Target creature's controller cannot cast summon spells. So this is pretty nuts, because a cumulative upkeep of 1 or less is pretty small, and you don't need to pay it when it comes into play. So if you play this card on your turn, they can't play any creature spells. They cannot cast any creature spells, which also means they can't play creature spells. And you paid the 4 initially, and then on your next upkeep you'll pay 1 red, which is again pretty cheap, and then they still can't cast creature spells, and then 2 red and 3 red and 4 red. So you can see if you put this on a player who's got a lot of creatures, it's going to be really tough. They're probably their main hope is to get rid of that creature, would be my guess, because that is everything for a creature deck. Their removal is usually stapled onto the creatures, their ramp is stapled onto the creatures, their card draw is stapled onto the creatures, and if you play this on them, they don't really have a whole lot they can do. So this is a fantastic way to stop any of those decks that win with the Overrun, Crater Hoof type of decks, which is, I would say, a very common way for players to win. 4 mana is a little high, but it's also completely shutting down a creature deck. Next up we have another red enchantment. An-Zerrin ruins is about a $1.30. And this enchantment says choose a creature type. Creatures of that type do not untap during their controller's untap phase. This is 2 red. So this is a way to really hose tribal decks. Again, tribal decks have lots of creatures of the same type, and they typically win by attacking. And if they also have creatures that tap and do stuff, whether it's tapping at mana or a deck like Persistent Petitioners, they tap the Petitioners to make people mill. Just imagine a player playing Relentless Rats and then finding out, oh, my creatures don't untap. I guess I'll attack you with this one creature, and then that's all it's going to do. Most players do not play cards to untap their creatures, so this also shuts down Voltron strategies if you just name that creature, because it does not target. So it doesn't matter if they have hexproof, if they have an indestructible, they won't be able to attack more than once. So you just have to either play this after they already attacked, or you can play this and then they're only going to get one attack, so they might not even attack because they might need a blocker, which is another way to think about this. If they already tap their creatures and then you play this, they're not going to gain any blockers that turn unless they cast a creature spell that gives them a blocker, but then they have to keep not attacking to have a blocker, and it kind of hoses them. And if you don't have a lot of creatures, it's not going to hose you very much. And you do choose a creature type, so you can always just pick one that's not your creatures and something that affects most of the board. Next up, we have Afiya Grove, which is an 83-cent green enchantment for 1 and green. Afiya Grove comes into play with 3+1/+1 counters on it. During your upkeep, put one of these counters on target creature. If Afiya Grove has none of these counters on it, bury it. Again, just sacrifice it. So I'm not going to say the most powerful card, but it is going to create value for +1/+1 counter synergy decks down the road. It's not even going to take that long. 2 mana to get 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 3 different creatures. And the way it comes in, putting 1 and then 1 and then 1 +1/+1 counter, is very synergistic with +1/+1 counter synergies, because most of the time the cards they play will have benefits for each time you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and not necessarily if you put 3 of them on. Like Hardened Scales, I think if you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, you add an additional. Well, if you put 3 counters on a creature all at once, you only get 1 additional under that scenario. Whereas this would put 1 and then an extra 1, so 2, and then 2, and then 2, and that's just an easy example. There's lots of synergies with +1/+1 counters. Please like, share, and subscribe to help this channel grow. Next up, we have an interesting one. It's a Phyrexian Marauder for $1.32. This is an artifact creature with mana cost of X, meaning you determine how much mana you want to sink into this, and then it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. It says Phyrexian Marauder cannot block, so yeah, that's a negative. Phyrexian Marauder cannot attack unless you pay 1 for each +1/+1 counter on it. Yes, that's another negative. So the thing is, though, a lot of artifact decks, it doesn't even matter what it says, they just want to cast artifacts. Because, for instance, red has many cards that say when an artifact enters the battlefield, deal damage. Blue has lots of cards that say when an artifact enters or is destroyed, draw a card. When an artifact enters, create another token, so on and so forth. So 0, this could be cast for 0. And yes, it would die, but it is still something that could happen. And 0-mana artifacts are innately powerful in those types of decks, combo decks, so on and so forth. Care about 0. This is also going to be great in Delirium decks. Decks that care about multiple card types in your graveyard. Because this is an artifact creature. This one card in your graveyard has 2 types. So you basically you pay 0, this hits the battlefield, state-based board effects happen, and it dies, goes to the graveyard. So you basically pay 0 to discard this in a way, but have effects trigger ETBs of different artifacts and creature synergies. Like even in a Beast Whisperer deck, green, where they draw for creatures being cast or entering the battlefield, 0 mana, draw a card if you have Beast Whisperer on the field. Like, it just can go into lots of decks, I feel. And I mean, if you absolutely had to, I guess you could pay for that mana for it to attack if it's like late game. But it's really irrelevant whether it can attack or block, because that's not why you're playing this card. And thanks for watching. Keep watching for more budget tips.